Far away in the quiet corners of space, a signal began to travel. It was faint at first, broken by static, and filled with a trembling voice that carried both fear and desperation. The message was not like the usual broadcasts of trade offers, military warnings, or cultural songs. It was something different, an urgent cry for help. It came from a small colony on a distant planet that very few in the galaxy even remembered existed. The colony was struggling to survive, attacked by sickness and hunger, and threatened by creatures native to their world. They had used the last of their energy reserves to send this one desperate transmission. The words were simple, almost childlike, in their plea. Please, anyone who can hear this, we are dying. We cannot hold on. The message traveled through the stars, reaching powerful civilizations. Some of these great powers were known for their vast fleets and endless resources. They heard the call clearly, but instead of compassion, there was silence. Many leaders dismissed the message as unimportant. Why waste resources on a weak, forgotten outpost? Some argued it was a trap. Others said it was not worth their time when their own people had needs. The distress call was logged in records, but no action followed. Meanwhile, on Earth, scientists who monitored deep space signals picked up fragments of this strange broadcast. At first, they thought it was interference, maybe a trick of cosmic background noise. But as they pieced it together, the message became clear. It was not random, static. It was a voice, a real voice crying for help. In a small laboratory, a group of researchers sat stunned, listening again and again. The words were weak, but they carried emotion strong enough to move even the most skeptical listener. One of the scientists, an HFY, older woman with gray hair tied neatly behind her head, leaned back in her chair and whispered, "This is real. Someone is out there, suffering." News spread among the research teams. Some governments were informed, but the response was cautious. Officials debated in large meeting halls, asking each other whether it was their responsibility to intervene. Earth was still new to the galactic community, still considered young and inexperienced compared to the older civilizations. If the powerful empires had ignored the call, why should Earth take it seriously? Yet outside of government walls, ordinary people began to talk. The recordings leaked, and soon they were shared widely on the internet. People listened, some with tears in their eyes, as the alien voice played through their speakers. For many, it did not matter who these strangers were. What mattered was that they were alive, afraid, and reaching out. Something unusual began to happen. It was not only humans who reacted to the signal. In aquariums and research centers, dolphins grew, restless, clicking and chirping whenever the recording was played. Elephants in sanctuaries responded with deep rumbles, as if echoing the sorrow in the call. Even birds, when exposed to the frequencies, shifted their songs in odd patterns. It was as if Earth's creatures, too, felt the pain carried across the stars. This puzzled the scientists. They ran experiments, playing the signals at different frequencies and measuring the responses. The results were undeniable. Animals reacted with unusual behavior every single time. It was as though the distress cry was not only for humans to hear, but for all living beings with the ability to sense emotion. For those who worked closely with animals, the reactions felt almost like communication. A dolphin trainer described how the dolphins began forming patterns with their clicks, mirroring parts of the alien sound. An elephant caretaker noticed the herd gathered together whenever the broadcast was played, staying close as if comforting one another. Even pets in homes, dogs, cats, and parrots, seemed unsettled when the signal was near. The debate among humans grew louder. Some argued that Earth should stay out of it, that it was too risky, and that powerful civilizations had surely made the right decision in ignoring the call. Others felt the opposite. They believed that to hear such a plea and do nothing would be to lose part of their humanity. After all, how many times in history had desperate voices been ignored until it was too late? The message itself began to weaken as days passed. Each new transmission sounded softer, more broken. The voice sometimes trailed off mid-sentence as if the speaker had grown too weak to continue. The silence that followed after each fragment was haunting. People wondered if, by the next day, there would be nothing left to hear. Despite official silence, small groups of humans began working in secret. Amateur radio operators tried to send replies, though they had no idea if the colony could hear them. Some scientists began translating parts of the alien language, comparing it with known galactic dialects. What they could understand confirmed the fears. Disease had spread, food supplies had run out, and the colony's defenses were failing. In the quiet of night, a young student sat by his computer, replaying the message over and over. He could not understand the alien words, but he understood the tone. It was the sound of someone clinging to hope. He imagined what it must feel like to send such a call, knowing that powerful empires had heard and chosen not to respond. He clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "We can't be like them, we can't turn away." The world was divided, but one truth was becoming clear. The creatures of Earth had already answered in their own way. Their reactions were raw and instinctive, free of political hesitation. They did not weigh the cost of helping or calculate the risks. They simply felt the sorrow and responded. What began as a fading signal in the void was now a growing question in the hearts of many on Earth. If no one else would step in, should they? Could an overlooked planet, still considered young and fragile by the galaxy, rise to do what greater powers would not? The decision had not yet been made, but the seeds of something extraordinary had been planted. The colony's call had reached Earth, and though the response was still uncertain, one thing was clear: silence would not last forever. Someone, or something, was listening. The days passed slowly, and the strange signal continued to echo across the skies. Each time it reached Earth, it seemed weaker than before, as though the sender's strength was fading. The scientists listening late at night would hold their breath when the signal arrived, worried that this might be the last time they would ever hear it. Each fragment of the message grew shorter, broken by long stretches of silence. It was as if the colony so far away was slipping deeper into despair with every hour. In the galaxy, the silence of the powerful was louder than the signal itself. The great empires, with their fleets of starships and mountains of resources, had made their choice. They had heard the call, and they had ignored it. In their towering councils, leaders used clever words to defend their inaction. Some said the colony had no strategic importance. Others claimed they could not risk wasting supplies on strangers who would give nothing in return. A few even argued it was dangerous. What if the message was bait set by enemies? With these words, they turned their backs and walked away. On the distant colony, the people knew they had been abandoned. They had sent their call not once, but many times, hoping against hope that someone would answer. When the long silence stretched on, they began to understand that no one was coming. The sick grew weaker, the hungry grew thinner, and the children cried quietly at night, too tired to even raise their voices. A heavy hopelessness settled over them, like a shadow that would not lift. Yet on Earth, things were different. The signal had not been ignored here. Ordinary people were still listening. In homes, classrooms, and research centers, the alien voice had touched something deep inside. Many could not understand the words, but they understood the feeling. It was the same feeling anyone might have if they were lost in the wilderness calling for help and wondering if anyone would come. The idea that powerful civilizations had ignored the call only made it more painful. People debated fiercely. On social media, some argued that Earth should not interfere. If the great empires did nothing, one person wrote, then why should we? Maybe they know something we don't. Others fired back with anger. If we hear someone drowning, do we ask whether it benefits us to save them? Or do we jump into the water? The debate spread everywhere. Cafes, buses, classrooms, and late-night radio shows. The world had been given a question, and everyone had an opinion. The most unexpected part of this story was not the people, but the creatures of Earth. In zoos, farms, and wild reserves, animals were still reacting to the recordings of the call. It became a topic of fascination for scientists and animal lovers alike. Dolphins responded with rapid clicks and whistles that mirrored pieces of the alien sound. Elephants gathered and rumbled together as if mourning. Birds tilted their heads and changed their songs. Even dogs, when the recording played, would whine and press closer to their owners. This strange reaction was not easy to explain. Some experts believed the frequencies of the message struck chords that animals could feel in their bodies, like vibrations of pain. Others thought animals could sense the emotion hidden in the sound itself. Whatever the reason, it was clear. Earth's creatures were not indifferent. They were restless, unsettled, as if they too wanted to answer the cry. As scientists studied the animals more carefully, something remarkable began to emerge. It was not just random noise. The responses carried patterns. The dolphins, in particular. The night was quiet on Earth when the first confirmed reply from the colony arrived. It was not a strong signal, nor was it clear, but it carried something important. In between the static and broken words, there was a rhythm, a pattern of sound, that seemed to echo the dolphin clicks Earth had sent earlier. The scientists leaned closer to their instruments, their eyes wide. It was not just coincidence. The colony had heard them. The dolphins' voices carried across the stars had reached beings who were on the edge of despair. For the first time since the signal began, there was hope. The researchers felt their hearts beating fast. They played the colony's new reply again and again, and each time the dolphins in the tanks responded with even louder clicks, as if they understood they had been answered. The elephants rumbled deeply when the sound was played near them, their massive bodies swaying as though in conversation. Birds tilted their heads and shifted their songs. Even small creatures, like bees in controlled hives, moved in strange, synchronized patterns during the recordings. It became clear. Earth's creatures were not simply reacting, they were communicating. Somehow, in ways beyond human understanding, they were weaving their own voices into the alien call. The bond was undeniable. Scientists began recording and arranging the animal responses more carefully. Instead of random noises, they shaped them into a message, a chorus of dolphin clicks, elephant rumbles, bird songs, and even whale calls from the depths of the oceans. Together, these voices formed something haunting and beautiful. It was not human speech, but it carried feeling, warmth, comfort, and unity. When they sent this message back into space, they waited anxiously. The reply came hours later, weaker but unmistakable. The alien voice, frail and trembling, carried a note of relief. The words were still hard to translate, but there was one phrase repeated several times. After days of study, the linguists agreed. The phrase meant, "We hear you." The colony had not only heard the sounds, but they had understood the meaning behind them. News spread across Earth like wildfire. Everywhere, people shared the recordings. Videos of dolphins answering the alien call went viral. Farmers recorded their cows, and sheep reacting strangely to the broadcast, while birdwatchers noticed entire flocks flying in patterns that matched parts of the signal. The story captured imaginations. The idea that animals, not governments, had been the first to comfort a dying world. Children in schools began to draw pictures of dolphins swimming through the stars, elephants lifting their trunks to distant planets, and birds carrying messages on their wings. Musicians composed songs blending the sounds of whales and alien static. For once, the world was united not in fear, but in wonder. Yet the colony's condition remained desperate. The signals described sickness spreading quickly, food supplies running out, and attacks from native predators on their world. They were still on the edge of collapse. The animals' responses had given them hope, but hope alone could not keep them alive. Something more had to be done. In meeting rooms across Earth, arguments flared again. Some officials warned that sending real aid could be dangerous. If powerful empires ignored them, there must be a reason, they said. Others pushed back. If we wait, they will die. What kind of people will we be if we let that happen? But while leaders debated, the people outside had already chosen their side. Groups of volunteers organized online, pooling resources and brainstorming ideas. Farmers offered to donate seeds and grains. Engineers suggested designs for portable shelters that could be carried on small ships. Medical researchers worked to analyze the fragments of data hidden in the signals, hoping to identify the disease afflicting the colonists. The animals continued to play their part. Dogs barked and whined when new fragments of the signal came in, warning handlers of shifts before machines could detect them. Dolphins created patterns that seemed to help researchers anticipate when the colony would send its next message. Even insects, like bees, shifted their movements in ways that inspired engineers to design better communication relays. It was as if the entire living world of Earth had decided to answer the call together. At one research center, a young biologist sat beside the dolphin pool late at night, listening to the recordings. She noticed the dolphins always repeated certain clicks when the colony's voice grew weakest. Out of curiosity, she isolated those clicks and sent them back as a direct reply. The result stunned her. The next day, the colony's message came stronger than expected, as if the dolphin's sound had given them strength to continue. She whispered softly to the dolphins, "You're saving them. You're really saving them." The moment became a turning point. Humanity realized this was no longer a matter of choice, it was a responsibility. The creatures of Earth had already chosen to help. Could humans do any less? Plans began to form. A small group of scientists and engineers worked on building a craft capable of reaching the colony quickly. Though Earth's technology was not yet as advanced as the great empires, they had enough to send a mission. Volunteers lined up, willing to risk the unknown for the chance to help strangers they had never met. They carried not only supplies, but also recordings of Earth's animals, planning to send messages of hope as they traveled. Back on the distant colony, the alien people gathered in the dim light of their failing shelters. They listened to the strange sounds Earth had sent, the clicks, rumbles, and songs, and for the first time in weeks, they smiled. Children mimicked the bird calls with their small voices, while the sick held on to each other, whispering that they were not forgotten. They had been sure they would die unseen and unheard, but now they knew different. Somewhere across the darkness of space, life had answered them. The silence of the powerful empires no longer mattered. What mattered was that a young world, one, still finding its place in the galaxy, had listened. Earth's answer had not come from politicians or generals. It had come from dolphins, elephants, birds, and bees. It had come from the voices of creatures that most civilizations would never consider important. For the colonists, that made it even more powerful. To them, it was proof that compassion was not measured by power or wealth, but by the willingness to care. And for Earth, it was only the beginning. The bond between humans, animals, and the distant colony had been forged. It was fragile, but it was real. And as the stars wheeled overhead, one truth shone brighter than ever. The call had been answered not by silence, but by life itself. The decision was finally made. Humanity could not stay silent anymore. The voices of the animals, the pleas of the colony, and the restless demand of people around the world had built too much momentum to ignore. Governments were slow, but ordinary people were faster. Scientists, engineers, farmers, and doctors worked side by side, preparing what little they had. The mission was not about glory or conquest, it was about saving lives. In workshops, welders bent steel and tightened bolts, working day and night. In laboratories, doctors studied the fragments of information about the colony's illness, sketching out treatments that might work. Farmers packaged seeds, grains, and hardy plants, labeling them carefully. Engineers looked at the designs of beehives, termite mounds, and bird nests to design simple shelters that could survive harsh environments. Every idea seemed to connect back to the creatures of Earth, as if they were guiding the way. The animals themselves continued to play their mysterious role. Dogs barked sharply whenever new signals arrived, sometimes seconds before the machines detected them. Dolphins clicked and whistled in patterns that helped researchers time the outgoing transmissions. Even elephants seemed to sense the gravity of the mission. In one sanctuary, an old elephant lifted its trunk to the sky and let out a deep, thunderous rumble as if sending strength across the stars. The caretakers wept, feeling as though the animals understood what was at stake. Volunteers came from everywhere. Some were experienced pilots, some were young scientists eager to help. Others were simple people, teachers, builders, and nurses, who wanted only to do something meaningful, They knew it was dangerous, but none of them cared. The story of the ignored distress call had struck too deeply. If Earth did nothing, it would mean they were no different from the silent empires. When the small fleet of ships was finally ready, people gathered in huge crowds to watch the launch. Families held signs with messages of support. Children waved, drawings of dolphins and elephants. Old men and women stood quietly, their faces proud. It was not just a mission anymore. It was a symbol. Earth was showing who they truly were. The volunteers carried not only supplies but also recordings of Earth's animals. They wanted the colonists to know that it was not just humans who cared. The voices of dolphins, the songs of birds, the calls of whales and the rumbles of elephants were all stored carefully, ready to be played on distant soil. They were carrying the heart of Earth itself. The journey was long and uncertain. The ships were smaller and slower than the mighty fleets of empires, but the volunteers pressed on. During the voyage, they listened to the recordings of the animals. The sounds kept their spirits high, reminding them why they were risking everything. One pilot whispered to himself as he heard the dolphins' clicks echo through the cabin. "We're not alone out here. They're with us." Finally, after many tense days, the colony's world came into sight. From her. Time passed and the fragile colony began to recover. The food supplies brought from Earth gave the people strength again. The medicines slowed the sickness, allowing many to rise from their beds. Children who had been too weak to play now laughed in the fields. Crops sprouted where once only dust had grown, and the new shelters stood firm against the storms. The colony was no longer on the edge of death. It was standing again. The colonists never forgot the moment Earth arrived. To them, it was a miracle. They spoke of the dolphins' voices that had first broken the silence, of the elephants, deep calls that gave them comfort, of the birds and bees that had inspired survival. They told their children, it was Earth, a small and overlooked world, that came when no one else would. The story spread far beyond the colony. Traders carried the news to nearby systems. Soon, even the great empires heard. At first, they dismissed it as a minor event, but as the story grew, embarrassment followed. The galaxy whispered about how the mighty had done nothing, while Earth, with its animals and its ordinary people, had saved lives. On Earth, the mission became a source of pride. People felt united in a way they had not in years. They realized that compassion was their strength. Politicians who had hesitated now praised the volunteers. Children learned in schools about the time Earth answered the call when no one else did. Musicians wrote songs blending the voices of whales and dolphins with the colony's replies. Painters filled canvases with images of elephants standing beside alien children, birds flying across two skies, and bees building bridges between worlds. The animals themselves returned to their normal lives, yet they remained symbols of something greater. Dolphins swam in their pools, unaware that their clicks had carried hope across the stars. Elephants grazed calmly, not knowing their rumbles had been remembered on another planet. Birds continued their songs, but now humans listened more carefully, hearing in them the echo of unity. For the colonists, Earth had become more than a savior. They began to see Earth as family. When they rebuilt their homes, they painted images of dolphins on the walls, carved birds into the beams, and shaped gardens in patterns like beehives. They did this to honor the creatures that had given them hope when all seemed lost. Years later, when the colony was strong again, they sent a message back to Earth. It was not a cry for help this time, but a voice of gratitude. The translation was simple but powerful. We live because you cared. You are our family now. The message carried not just to Earth but across the galaxy. And once again, people listened. The great empires shifted uncomfortably. Their silence, during the crisis, could never be erased. But Earth's name was now spoken with respect. It was not because Earth had the strongest ships or the largest armies. It was because Earth had listened when no one else did. The legacy of that choice grew. Other small colonies and struggling worlds began reaching out to Earth, not to the empires. They trusted the young planet because they knew it would not ignore them. And on Earth itself, people looked at their animals with new eyes. They saw, not just creatures, but companions, beings who had played a part in one of the greatest acts of compassion in history. The unanswered call had changed everything. It had revealed who would stand silent and who would step forward. It had shown that the heart of Earth was not in its weapons or its wealth, but in its willingness to care. And so the story was told, generation after generation, how a faint voice cried out from the stars, how the mighty ignored it, and how Earth and its creatures answered. The dolphins, the elephants, the birds, the bees, the humans, all together had created a legacy of compassion that would never be forgotten. The call had gone unanswered by the powerful, but in the end, it was answered by life itself. And that answer carried more strength than any empire could ever hold.